What's with random encounters? Random encounters are a common feature to role-playing games. When you're in a hazard zone, there are chances that you can enter a combat sequence, forcing you to fight, flee, or depending on the game, do a multitude of other things. The first game to use random encounters was a 1981 game called Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord for the Apple II. Sometimes while frolicking through dungeons, you would randomly encounter enemies. Technically, one could argue that 1971's The Oregon Trail did random encounters first, but I'm having trouble referring to getting dysentery as an encounter. Speaking of which, I'm talking only about encounters here. Randomly spawning enemies around a map don't count as encounters. It's the difference between this and this. It seems as though everyone has an opinion on random encounters. Some people hate them, asserting that they're an interruption to gameplay and only serve as a nuisance. Some people love them, believing that they keep the game entertaining and allow you to keep training for the harder battles ahead. Random encounters can occur in many different ways. Some games, such as the Pokémon games, feature hazard areas in which you can experience these random encounters. While in some senses you can avoid the encounters altogether, sometimes game designers put other obstacles in the way or force you to pass through a hazard area to actually progress through the game. Other games place hazard areas all across a map. While you may be safe in a city, exiting the area will leave you helpless against the random number generators. But all this begs the question, how do we know these encounters are truly random? Surely they feel random, right? Well, that depends on the game. Some games use pure randomness, where every step has the same chance of an encounter as the last. While it's great that this is a truly random encounter, this type of design suffers in that you could, theoretically, find a new enemy every time you take a step, which would be crazy monotonous to deal with. Other games use simulated randomness. Technically, these games don't have random encounters. Generally, they'll make sure you can take a few steps before you find yourself in another battle. On the other hand, you won't often find yourself going far before you find another fight. Perhaps this is why so many players hate random encounters. Not because they aren't truly random, but because they could possibly happen too frequently. One could say that frequent random encounters can make a player feel helpless, which is sometimes the intent of the game designer, but it can quickly become a nuisance when your progression is being constantly impeded by something that you can easily just flee from. When it gets to that point, it's essentially just a waste of time. So how can random encounters be worth your time? Surely there's some merit to them, right? Well, I already mentioned the examples of using them to gain experience, but how else can it be made to feel worth it to the player? Some games give you rewards other than EXP for completing battles, such as in-game currency, other types of loot, random drops of items, etc. Pokemon games sometimes use rare or shiny Pokemon to coax players into looking through the grass. Finding them can often be a huge surprise. Surprises can also be used to make random encounters more exciting. It's good for the encounters to not all feel the same. I already mentioned the example of finding shiny or rare Pokemon, but what else can surprise you out of random encounters?
Shiny hunting at all, except for the Dwebble thing, but that kind of...
Oh my god! In Pokemon, sometimes you'll find roaming legendaries. When you find any Pokemon in the grass or other hazard zone, even if it's a rare or shiny, the same song will play. But when you find a roaming legendary in the grass, a different song will play, sometimes with a different fight animation. This can quickly come as a shock to players unfamiliar with what's going on, or just players who weren't expecting the fight. Speaking of music, it too plays an important role in random encounters. If the player hates the song that keeps coming on every time they come into an encounter, it will quickly get on their nerves. It's hard to write a song that literally every player will like though. Instead of that being the aim of the composer, it would be a good idea to write a song that gets the player ready for battle. It's a lot more fitting for a game to thrust you into a random battle rather than ease you into it. Making the encounters not give you much as a player, keeping the encounters boring and monotonous, having annoying or boring music every time you get in an encounter, these are the things that make players want to avoid random encounters so much, and some games let you do that. As mentioned before, games that have preset hazard areas often allow the player to walk around them, sometimes at a cost. Other than that, some games give the player items, abilities, or even options to avoid or lessen random encounters. These can give players the freedom to avoid random encounters where they please, but can risk giving the player too much freedom, missing out on vital experience. The repels in Pokemon are a good blend of the two, allowing you to avoid battles, but not if your lead party Pokemon is too low a level. Some games allow you to run at a faster speed, but this can increase the frequency of random encounters. The very opposite is present in some games too, including Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In these games, instead of walking or running through the grass, you can sneak, which drops the random encounter rate drastically, but it also slows your speed. It's an interesting juxtaposition. Is it worth possibly finding an enemy to go at a normal speed, or do you want to tread carefully and avoid all encounters? Giving the player this decision alters their thought processes, especially when their party is weak and possibly unable to handle another random encounter. So what's the point? Random encounters are a neat way to mix up the gameplay of RPGs. While notorious for getting on people's nerves, some view them as a necessary feature for experience and gameplay's sake. Some games leave you vulnerable just about everywhere, while others have predetermined zones where they can get to you. Sometimes fake randomness feels more random to the player, as improper as that might seem. A collection of factors go into random encounters that, when properly manipulated, can shape a game that makes the player feel as liberated or helpless as the designers see fit. And that's what's with random encounters. Hey, thanks so much for watching the video. If you have any idea on what the next episode should be about, feel free to leave a comment and I'll definitely consider it. Be sure to follow What's With Games on Facebook and Twitter, and don't forget to subscribe. If you liked the video, consider giving it a like and sharing it with your friends. If you'd like to see my first video on falling damage, click that link right there.